Hey everyone. Tonight, I have 4 deeply unsettling stories sent in by hospital workers who experienced things during their night shifts that they still can't explain. These stories come from nurses, orderlies, and security guards who were just trying to do their jobs until something went horribly wrong. If you work nights in a hospital, you already know how eerie those long, quiet hallways can get. But these stories, they go way beyond eerie. Let's begin. Story 1. The Woman in Room 12. This first story comes from a nurse named Sarah, who worked the night shift at a mid-size hospital in rural Pennsylvania. Sarah had been a nurse for about 3 years when this happened. She was used to the night shift by then. The strange noises, the flickering lights, the occasional confused patient wandering the halls. But nothing prepared her for what happened one night in the geriatric ward. It was around 2:30 in the morning. The ward was unusually quiet. Most of the patients were asleep, and Sarah was doing her rounds, checking vitals and making sure everyone was comfortable. When she got to room 12, she stopped. The door was slightly open. That was odd, because she distinctly remembered closing it earlier. She pushed it open gently, trying not to wake the patient inside, an elderly woman named Mrs. Callahan, who had been admitted a few days prior with pneumonia. But when Sarah stepped inside, she froze. Mrs. Callahan was sitting upright in bed, staring directly at the corner of the room. Her eyes were wide, unblinking. Her mouth hung open slightly, like she was in shock. "Mrs. Callahan," Sarah whispered, "are you okay?" No response. She walked closer, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. That's when she noticed something that made her stomach drop. Mrs. Callahan wasn't breathing. She immediately checked for a pulse. Nothing. She hit the emergency button and started CPR. But deep down, she knew it was too late. Mrs. Callahan had been dead for at least a few minutes. The code team arrived and confirmed it. Time of death, 2:33 a.m. But here's the part that still haunts Sarah. As they were wheeling Mrs. Callahan's body out of the room, Sarah glanced at the corner where the old woman had been staring, and she saw it. A shadow. Not just any shadow, a figure. Tall, thin, and completely still. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching. Sarah blinked, and it was gone. She told herself it was just the stress, the exhaustion, the dim lighting playing tricks on her. But then one of the other nurses, a woman named Karen, who had worked there for over 20 years, pulled her aside. "Did you see it?" she asked quietly. "See what?" "The thing in the corner." Sarah's blood ran cold. Karen explained that over the years, several nurses had reported seeing the same shadow figure in room 12, always in the corner, always just before a patient died. They called it the Watcher. Sarah requested to be moved to a different ward the very next week. She never worked in geriatrics again. And to this day, she refuses to talk about what she saw in that corner. Story 2. The Elevator. This next story comes from a hospital orderly named James, who worked at a large teaching hospital in Chicago. James's job was simple: transport patients, deliver supplies, and assist the nursing staff. Most of his shifts were uneventful, but one night something happened that made him seriously consider quitting. It was around 3 a.m. James was taking the service elevator down to the basement to grab some linens from the laundry room. The hospital was old, built in the 1940s, and the basement was a labyrinth of dimly lit hallways and storage rooms that no one liked going to, especially at night. James stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the basement. The doors closed with a metallic groan,
and the elevator began its slow descent. That's when he heard it. A voice. Faint, distant, but unmistakably a child's voice. "Help me." James's heart skipped a beat. He looked around the elevator. He was alone. The voice came again, clearer this time. "Please, help me." It was coming from above him. James looked up at the ceiling panel. His hands were shaking. He told himself it was just the old building settling, or maybe sound traveling through the ventilation system, but the voice was too clear, too close. The elevator jerked to a stop, but the doors didn't open. James was stuck between floors. He pressed the emergency button. Nothing. He tried his radio. Static. And then the lights went out. Complete darkness. James fumbled for his phone, turning on the flashlight. The weak beam barely illuminated the cramped space. That's when he heard it again. "Help me!" But this time, it wasn't coming from above him. It was coming from behind him. James spun around, his flashlight shaking in his hand. There was nothing there, but he felt it. A presence, cold, suffocating, like something was standing right behind him, breathing down his neck. He pounded on the elevator doors, screaming for help. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the lights flickered back on. The elevator lurched, and the doors slid open. James stumbled out into the basement hallway, gasping for air. He never went back to that elevator again. Later, he asked one of the older maintenance workers about it. The man's face went pale. "You heard the kid, didn't you?" Apparently, back in the 1950s, a young boy had died in that elevator. He'd been a patient in the pediatric ward, and somehow he'd wandered into the service elevator late at night. The elevator malfunctioned, and the boy was trapped inside for hours before anyone found him. By the time they did, it was too late. James put in his 2 weeks' notice the next day.
Story 3. The Morgue Incident. This story comes from a security guard named David, who worked at a hospital in upstate New York. David's job was to patrol the hospital grounds and make sure everything was secure. Most nights were boring, just walking the empty hallways, checking locked doors, and occasionally dealing with confused visitors. But one night, he got a call on his radio that changed everything. "David, we need you in the basement. Morgue entrance, now." David's stomach tightened. He hated the morgue. Everyone did. When he arrived, he found 2 nurses standing outside the morgue doors, looking visibly shaken. "What's going on?" he asked. One of the nurses, a young woman named Emma, pointed at the doors. "We heard noises coming from inside." Frowned. "What kind of noises?" "Banging, like someone pounding on the door from the inside." David felt a chill run down his spine. The morgue was supposed to be empty. There were no bodies scheduled for intake that night. He pulled out his keys and unlocked the door, pushing it open slowly. The morgue was cold, sterile. Rows of metal drawers lined the walls, each one sealed tight. Everything seemed normal, but then he heard it. A low, muffled thud. It was coming from one of the drawers. David's heart was racing. He approached the drawer slowly, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The nameplate on the drawer read, John Doe, deceased 11/08/2019. Another thud. David swallowed hard and grabbed the handle. "Don't open it," whispered Emma from the doorway. But David had to know. He pulled the drawer open. Inside was the body of a middle-aged man, pale and lifeless. His eyes were closed. His hands were folded across his chest. Nothing unusual. But then David noticed something that made his blood run cold. The man's fingers were bruised, scraped, like he'd been clawing at something. David slammed the drawer shut and backed away. Later, he checked the records. The man, John Doe, had been brought in 2 days earlier. Cause of death? Cardiac arrest. But there was a note in the file that made David's stomach turn. Possible misdiagnosis. Family requested autopsy. The autopsy was scheduled for the next morning. David quit 3 days later. He never found out what the autopsy revealed, but he still wonders if that man was really dead when they put him in that.
Story 4. The Patient Who Wouldn't Leave. This final story comes from a nurse named Rachel, who worked at a psychiatric hospital in Oregon. Rachel had been working in the psych ward for about 5 years when she met a patient named Daniel. Daniel was in his mid-30s, soft-spoken and polite. He'd been admitted after a severe mental breakdown, but after a few weeks of treatment, he seemed to be doing much better. The doctors were even talking about releasing him soon. But Rachel noticed something strange. Every night, around 3 a.m., Daniel would stand at his door and stare down the hallway. He wouldn't move, wouldn't speak, just stare. One night, Rachel approached him. "Daniel, you should be in bed. Is everything okay?" Daniel didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the far end of the hallway. "She's waiting for me," he whispered. "Who's waiting for you?" "The lady in white." Rachel felt a chill. There was no one there. "Daniel, there's no one—" "She's always there," he interrupted, his voice eerily calm. "Every night, she wants me to follow her." Rachel tried to dismiss it as a symptom of his condition. But over the next few nights, other staff members started reporting the same thing. A figure, a woman in a white gown, standing at the end of the hallway, always at 3 a.m. No one could ever get a clear look at her. She was always just there, watching. One night, Rachel decided to stay late and see for herself. At exactly 3 a.m., she stood in the hallway and looked toward the far end. And there she was, a woman in a white hospital gown, standing perfectly still. Her face was obscured by shadows, but Rachel could feel her eyes, staring. Rachel's legs wouldn't move. She wanted to run, to scream, but she was frozen. And then the woman started walking, slowly, deliberately, toward Rachel. Rachel finally snapped out of it and ran back to the nurse's station, slamming the door behind her.
When she looked back, the woman was gone. The next morning, Rachel checked the records. Decades ago, a patient in that ward, a woman named Eleanor, had died under mysterious circumstances. She'd wandered out of her room one night and was found dead at the end of the hallway. No cause of death was ever determined. Rachel requested a transfer the next day. Daniel was released a week later, but before he left, he told Rachel something that still haunts her. She's not gone, you know. She's still waiting and